Karen Shedler, a member at King of Glory for over 30 years and also a member of our Caring for the Creation team. I've been an environmental educator for over 45 years, and that led me to give the sermon in January 2019 during our Caring for Creation Sunday. If you were in attendance that day, you remember we talked about food. This blog is going to look at one specific aspect of that, the topic of food waste. So I want to ask you, what's on your dinner plate? How much food that you have brought into your home in the last month, either coming from the grocery store or from takeout from your favorite dining establishment, how much of that has actually made it to the table and been eaten? How much has ended up in your trash can and therefore was destined to the landfill? September is the month designated for faith communities around the country to address the significant problem that we have in this country with food waste. About 40% of all our food is wasted. As people of faith, what is our role in food waste and why should we even care? Well, in Genesis 2, we learn that God commanded us to take care and be stewards of his marvelous creation. In Matthew 25, we're taught that no one should ever go hungry. And Jesus reminded us that when we feed those who are hungry, we are also feeding him. So what are the connections between that Old Testament in Genesis and that New Testament in Matthew's passages? Well, the answer is very simple. We have lots of hungry families all around our country and our state. In fact, about 25% of all Arizona's children do not have food security. They go home after school when they're able to go to school, and without that school lunch, there is nothing for them to eat, nothing in the pantry, nothing in the refrigerator. And that's right here at home. And we very likely even have people in our own congregation that we don't realize are also going very hungry. Around the world, there are 800 million people who face hunger on a daily basis. And 21,000 people globally die every single day due to a lack of sufficient food. That's 1 every 10 seconds. And that's despite the fact that we produce sufficient food to feed the entire world population 2 to 3 times over. How is it that in a world that has such an abundance of food, yet we still have so many people going hungry? The answer is simple: wasted food. And I'm not talking about rotting tomatoes or moldy bread, and for heaven's sakes, if you have moldy bread or moldy any baked products, toss that. It is not safe to eat. But I'm not talking about that. Here's what I'm talking about. Those oddly shaped fruits and vegetables that grocers have very difficult time even getting off their shelves and likely won't even put them out because we consumers are pretty picky. You know, the carrots aren't straight enough, the apples aren't red enough, they're not polished enough, they're not that photo picture food that we see in all those food journals. I'm talking about food that goes bad because it's not refrigerated quickly enough. I'm talking about leftovers that are perfectly good but that are thrown out. I'm talking about food from restaurants that give you such huge portions, there is no way that any of us could eat it. What happens to what's left? Do you take it home? Do you leave it on the plate? If it's left on the plate, it's going to get tossed. If you take it home, well, are you actually eating it or do you bury it in the back of your refrigerator? I want you to think about the employee at the store who's throwing out all that perfectly good food because the newest, freshest shipment of its replacements just arrived. I'm thinking about the farmer who grew carrots but left many of them in the field to rot because they simply were not pretty enough. They weren't that beautiful, long, straight orange that we always expect. Perfectly good to eat, a little misshapen, but they taste just as well and they're just as nutritious as the perfect ones you see in the store. And I'm talking about the food in your kitchen that looks and smells perfectly good, but oh gee, best buy and you've passed that date 2 days ago, so you throw it away, package and all. That's what I'm talking about when I'm talking about wasted food. So think about those things. Think about all that waste, all of it. Globally, we waste 2.9 trillion pounds of food every year. That's enough to feed those 800 million people and a whole lot more. But food is not just a hunger problem. And think about all the food you waste. That's like setting fire to your dollar bills. Do you know the average American family wastes 1,000 pounds of food every year? What did that cost you financially? But food waste is a bigger problem. It also is an environmental problem because all that food production and waste is taking a giant toll on our planet. Think about all the water used to irrigate all those crops, to water the livestock, all that food that's wasted, that water is also wasted. Think about the fossil fuels used in the machinery, the tractors and the trucks, to plant, to tend, to harvest, to process, to package, to transport. All of that fossil fuel wasted. Think about the electricity in the store that held that food that it eventually had to get thrown out. All wasted. And think about the jars and the cans and all that excess packaging that our food comes in. If you toss it out, container and all, and don't recycle that packaging, that's a tremendous amount of waste, not just the food, but the packaging as well. And let's not forget the labor that's involved with this. All those people that tended that produce, that tended that livestock, that processed it, that packaged it and brought it to your table. And of course, all that food itself is also wasted. All these wasted resources annually use the same amount of water that flows through the Volga River in Eastern Europe. That's Eastern Europe's largest river. That amount of water is what is wasted with food production and processing and transport on an annual basis. The packaging, the transporting, the harvesting, getting it into the stores out of the warehouses, getting it from the stores back to your table, only to throw it away, that's a pretty big waste. And that uses, and I should say wastes, 3.3 billion metric tons of carbon dioxide, which is a major greenhouse gas. Greenhouse gases are major drivers in climate change, and we here in Arizona are certainly seeing the impacts of climate change this summer with our extended heat wave. It's been said that if food waste were a country, it would be the world's third largest emitter of greenhouse gases, behind the US and China, the third largest emitter of greenhouse gases. Now, that drives climate change, and climate change creates refugees, drives poor farmers off the land, makes devastating storms even more powerful. We saw that in Iowa just a month or two ago. And while it hurts everyone, it hurts the poor much worse. Climate change is like poverty on steroids for the poorest among us. We have hungry families whose children don't get enough to eat, and with empty tummies, they cannot begin to focus and concentrate while they're trying to learn in school. Even adults who suffer from lack of nourishment, solid, healthy nourishment, don't have the strength to perform the jobs well that they usually could do were they fed properly. We're taught to be grateful for our food, and yet look at what we waste. We're taught to feed the hungry, yet we throw away so much that could do so much good for so many. We're taught to protect the earth, but we're causing harm because we're not even thinking about the consequences of our actions. We can do better. We need to make sure that all the food we produce is used to fill stomachs and not to fill landfills. We must each do our part, and here's some simple things that every one of us can do. Decide to buy just the food that you need. Don't go shopping when you're hungry because you're apt to just do impulse buying. Make a list of what you're going to be cooking that week. Get just those foods and feed your family fresh food, and feed it while it's still fresh. Accept the fact that produce can be top quality but may not look as pretty and as perfect as what you see in all those food journals and magazines. If you're going out to eat, use a take-home container. Bring home those leftovers, and better yet, rather than using one of those provided by the restaurant, take your own. Make it reusable so that you are not contributing to the packaging waste, because packaging of plastic is a whole different story for another day. And donate any excess food to a nearby food pantry. KOG supports Paz de Cristo. They're always in need of food baskets for those who don't have food sufficiently in their households. Are we in this church willing to commit to do better than we have been doing? Remember, reducing food waste is the third best solution to global warming, and that's something every one of us can do. Minimize food waste, and we are taking out a great deal of those climate change greenhouse gases that are driving climate change. Think of this as a return to the Clean Plate Club, but this time you have a conscience. I invite each one of you to make a pledge to yourself and a promise to God to do better, to minimize your food waste at every single opportunity you can. Will you join in? I hope and pray that you will, because hungry people and God's beautiful creation are all depending on every one of us.